woke slowly beneath the thatched roof, its worn fibers brushing faintly against your skin. The creak of ancient timbers beneath your bare back echoed softly in the stillness. A sharp scent of smoke, mingled with damp earth, seeped into your nostrils through the cracks of the isolated hut. Your bare feet met the rough coldness of the dirt floor, scattered with dust and tiny splinters of broken wood. Rising was the first of many repetitive motions in your unseen routine. You adjusted the tattered rags draped over your scarred flesh, listening faintly to distant bells tolling the rhythms of cities you dared not enter. Surviving as a Hinin, an outcast scorned by law, you knew every small act, fetching muddy water, warming leftover rice, was a silent battle for existence. Outside, the shadows of feudal Japan stretched long and merciless over the landscape, where cities stood like unreachable fortresses. The sharp gazes of patrolling guards could turn a single misplaced step into a death sentence. You were invisible, or so you had to believe, moving in the periphery of a world that denied you presence. The dull gray sky blurred with the smoke curling from distant chimneys, mixing with the cold, inquisitive air slipping through your fragile shelter. Your hands brushed over the woven straw above, rough and brittle, as your senses sharpened to the faint noises beyond, the faint murmur of a distant market, the soft rustle of dry leaves skittering across cracked earth. It struck you briefly. In the modern world, survival meant charging a phone, scrolling past endless noise. Here, survival was the slow dance of hiding, the endless loop of tiny, cautious actions. No low battery warnings, only the pressing fatigue of wary limbs and wary eyes. You rose, each movement deliberate yet sluggish, feeling the chill grip your bones as you stepped out into the muted light. The river was your source, its water thick with mud and whispering secrets as you cupped your hands to draw it in slow, repeated gestures. The cool liquid slipped past your lips, barely washing away the dryness clinging to your throat. You carried it carefully back, mindful of shadowed corners, the imagined crack of a twig underfoot, making your breath catch. Return to the fire, a small heap of smoldering embers that offered a fragile warmth in the encroaching cold. Lifting a handful of hardened rice, you pressed it gently into a clay bowl, warming it repeatedly over the flickering glow. Each breath you took was slow, steady, a quiet rhythm punctuated by the faint clicking of drying wood. You wrapped your arms around yourself, feeling the heat lap softly against your skin, a momentary balm to the chill outside. Then, as you settled into the dim light, a sudden hush fell over the distant market. The usual murmur vanished. Barking dogs cut silent. Your heart slowed, yet tension coiled beneath your ribs. A shadow moved unexpectedly at the far edge of vision. The world tightened imperceptibly. Something was different now. If For Morpheus takes you completely, check if you're still subscribed. Sometimes the button disappears, and you wouldn't want to miss the next stories to drift off with. Leave a pillow-soft like and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. Your presence keeps this quiet corner alive. Thanks for being here. You held your breath as the silence thickened, pressing against the thin walls of your refuge. The shrill absence of the market's usual clamor felt like a weight settling deep into your chest. Your fingers fidgeted with the uneven weave of the straw roof, each thread brittle beneath your touch, fragile as the murmurs of the world beyond. Shadows gathered, though the sky remained stubbornly gray, dulling even the barest glimmers of light. You dared not step outside yet. Every creak, every whisper of wind seemed amplified in the stillness, as if the night itself was watching, waiting. The fire's faint warmth tried to cling to your skin, but the cold roots deep into your bones, stubborn and relentless. You tilted your head, catching the faintest scrape, too soft to place, too deliberate to ignore. Your heart fluttered like a trapped bird, wings beating slow and heavy. You slid your gaze toward the hut's entrance, where the shadows pooled darkest, thick and impenetrable. The air smelled of damp earth mingled with a thread of smoke, now tinged faintly with something acrid, unfamiliar. You shifted your weight, toes sinking into the cold dirt, the roughness biting gently beneath your calloused soles. Every sense prickled alert, your skin sensitive to the slight drafts threading through cracks in the wooden beams. The rustling of leaves outside whispered like a subdued conversation, uneven, hesitant, as if nature itself held its breath. The scent grew stronger, a slow tendril of tension that wrapped around your neck, tightening. Slowly, deliberately, you slid toward the doorway, careful to keep your movements light, a soft dance with the earth. The edge of the hut was a blur of muted grays and browns, the flicker of dying embers casting long, trembling shadows against the worn doorframe. Your fingers brushed the cool, splintered wood, the texture raw and splintery, a reminder of the countless nights sheltered here. The outside world felt vast and unknowable, a jagged frame beyond your fragile sanctum. Your eyes traced the silhouette of a figure beyond the veil of the trees, a shadow that refused to settle, shifting with the faint rustle of the breeze. The presence was distant, yet heavy, like an echo you could almost reach, but never quite grasp. Muscles coiled cautiously as you descended further onto the earth, each movement slow, measured. Your breathing matched the muted rhythm of the world, the creak of a twig, the far-off call of a night bird, the faint pulse of your own heartbeat thudding beneath scarred flesh. The night air was sharp, tinged with the scent of wet wood and a trace of iron, thin and elusive, like a secret slipping between spaces. You listened intently. The absence of normal sounds, now deafening, punctuated only by the subtle shifting of leaves. The stillness around you was no longer a comfort. It had become a presence, something alive yet unseen, pulsing alongside your tentative steps. You knelt beside the shallow stream that traced the edge of the clearing, its waters murky and slow, tangled with floating leaves and fallen bark. With cupped hands, you drew the cold liquid, feeling it flow sluggishly, thick with sediment. The touch of water was a brief relief against the dry grit of your palms. You paused, listening to the silence, the faint scrape that returned again, softer, closer this time. A twitch ran up your spine, and your breath caught, held in the fragile space before release. The weight of the moment pressed in, heavy, yet oddly soothing, as if the world had stilled to watch your smallest decisions. Around you, the tree trunks stood like silent sentinels, their bark rough and cracked beneath your fingers as you traced slow, reverent patterns. A soft rustle whispered again, leaves stirring faintly, like a sigh lost in the dark. You dared not turn fully, not yet, preferring the hesitant glances with narrowed eyes. Your hands searched along the ground, finding a small flint, rough and warm, where the embers had passed. You gathered the remains of ash and brittle sticks, cradling them close to coax a flame. Each careful breath was steady, coaxing life from the reluctant tinder. The glow returned slowly, a gentle pulse of amber light flickering against the encroaching gloom. The fire's warmth seeped into your chilled skin, a fleeting balm that seemed to push back the tension just enough to let you breathe. As the minutes stretched, the silence shifted. The figure, the presence lingering like a question unanswered, seemed to retreat, swallowed by the embrace of the night. The world exhaled alongside you, the distant tolling of bells resuming, a tentative rhythm threading through the darkness. And yet, in that calm, a new sound trembled beneath the surface, a soft, rhythmic tapping, steady and deliberate. Your gaze fixed toward the unseen source, every sense tingling with sudden alertness. The tapping grew louder, a slow, resonant echo that did not belong. The unmistakable cadence of footsteps, not hurried, but heavy, deliberate, and unyielding. The ground vibrated faintly beneath you, the sound wrapping through the trees like a pulse. You froze, every muscle taut, the whispered noises of the forest fading into silence once more. The fire crackled softly, a fragile thread between you and the unknown. The tapping approached, not in haste, but inexorably, as if the night itself carried the weight of its coming. In the shadowed quiet just beyond your haven, you understood. The patience that had held you until now would be tested in ways still unseen. The night was no longer just a place to hide. It was a threshold. And just as the steps drew close enough to stir the dry leaves before the door, a sharp scent, something metallic, ripe, rose up and tangled in the cold air, catching your breath and anchoring you. Waiting, you remained motionless as the footsteps ceased just beyond your fragile door, leaving the air thick with a heavy silence that pressed close, like damp cloth against skin. The fire's gentle flicker cast long shadows that stretched and recoiled along the floorboards, tracing the contours of your small refuge. Your breath, slow and measured, mingled with the faint curl of smoke, rising wispy and thin as it sought the cracked rafters overhead. The sharp, metallic scent lingered still, a quiet promise drifting in the cold air, settling in the marrow of your bones. You dared not breathe deeply, afraid to stir the invisible watcher, hidden in the murmur of wind and rustling leaves. Your fingers traced the rough edge of the clay bowl, worn smooth from countless nights warmed by your careful touch. Tentatively, you shifted, each movement deliberate and cautious, the dirt floor cold beneath your bare feet. Outside, the night pressed in, a velvet weight folded over the world, muffling sound and light. The trees bowed low, their branches whispering secrets as the breeze slipped past. You stepped into the doorway, muscles tensed beneath faded rags, eyes scanning the darkened clearing with cold, wary focus. There, pressed against the thickness of shadow near a crooked birch, the figure lingered, still, undeniable. No urgent movement betrayed it, only the faint, steady tap of boots against earth. You held your breath again, heart threading a slow rhythm through your chest, each beat a careful step toward nerve and silence. The night was a heavy cloak, woven tight with expectation and unseen eyes. A chill slid down your spine as the air thickened with the musk of damp bark and the iron tang you'd smelled before. The flames sputtered, a weak pulse against the creeping cold, but you embraced it, drawing warmth deep, letting the glow seep slowly into your limbs. The firelight clung to your skin like a tender caress, a brief shield against the forbidding dark. Your gaze flicked to the perimeter, beyond the clearing, where shadows twisted and folded into one another like whispered threats. Somewhere distant, the faint toll of bells resumed, their tolling slow and hollow, weaving a thread of melancholy through the night. Yet within the hollow spaces between sounds, the tapping persisted, steady and unyielding, echoing like a heartbeat separate from your own. Slowly, you knelt beside the embers, fingers brushing away ash to reveal the fragile core still glowing faintly. You gathered a few dry twigs, their brittle ends catching sparks as you arranged them with care. The fire hesitated, blinking small tongues of amber before settling into a warmer glow. The warmth bloomed, spreading through you like a whispered comfort, softening the edges of tension curling tight within. The figure at the edge of the trees did not move. You felt the weight of their presence stretch, a taut wire strung between your breathing and the hushed night. Your skin prickled as the faint wind carried a muted sound, something like the crackle of cloth or a slow exhale. The air shifted, pulling at your worn clothes, urging you to consider flight, to blend once more into the folds of shadow. But you remained, rooted in place by wary resolve, etched into every fiber of your being. The earth beneath your knees was cold and rough, grainy with fallen leaves and splinters of bark, and yet you touched it reverently. Fingers spread, you counted its irregular textures, the coarse grit of dirt, the sharp edge of a pebble, the smooth curve of a droplet-cooled leaf. These tiny details grounded you, knitted a fragile thread of calm through the fraying edges of fear. The tapping slowed, then stopped, swallowed once more by the encompassing stillness. You stared into the dark coil where the figure had stood, a hollowed space filled with quiet suspicion. The faint ember light flickered a warning, casting shadows that leapt like restless thoughts. You breathed, shallow and even, listening to the faintest shift, a leaf skittering, a pebble nudged by small, unseen movement. Your hand brushed against the empty wall beside you, finding the familiar rough weave of straw that shielded you from the cold night. Each strand, brittle and delicate, told a story of quiet endurance and fragile hope. You pressed your palm there, drawing the slow, steadying breath, the faint pulse of your heartbeat weaving timber into the silence. From somewhere deeper in the darkness came the subtle creak of wood settling, the sigh of ancient timbers pushed by unseen weight. Your gaze flickered toward the hut's threshold, now shrouded in deeper shadow. The moment stretched taut, as if the world held its breath alongside you. The night whispered again, and through the quiet came a sudden pulse, a slow, low thud, unmistakable and slow, like footsteps returning. You pivoted slightly, muscles coiled for movement, eyes catching the slow progress of light reflected off cold metal. A glimpse, brief as a blink, near the tree line's hunch. The figure re-emerged, closer now, steady and deliberate. No haste in those heavy steps. Only the inexorable approach of inevitability. The warm glow of your fire softened the edges of fear for a moment, a slender thread of comfort before tension wove once more, tangled and thick. You crouched low beside the flickering embers, fingers probing the earth as you plotted silent paths, each potential escape traced carefully in your mind. Your breath caught at the sudden crackle of dry leaves, sharp and close, heart drumming a slow, unyielding rhythm that merged with the tapping and the distant city bells. And then, just as the slender fingers of smoke rose lazily toward the starless sky, a whispered sound slipped through the night air. A voice, barely a breath, carried on the wind, so close it brushed the edge of your mind. A single word, stretched thin and strange in the quiet, vibrating with a weight you had not expected. You froze, the echoed word wrapped tight around your senses, a fragile thread pulling you deeper into the waiting dark. The presence at the door hovered, no longer distant, no longer just shadow. The night held you still, poised on the edge of what was to come, where silence was no longer just absence, but a prelude. And in that frozen instant, your eyes caught the glint of a small folded paper pressed against the wood, delivered with the slow certainty of fate awaiting your reach. You crouched low, the coarse dirt pressing against your knees, cold and unyielding as the firelight flickered softly beside you. The paper, thin and creased, lay just within reach against the wood of the doorframe. You inhaled slowly, the sharp scent of iron and wet bark mingling with the lingering smoke. Fingers trembling ever so slightly, you reached out, tracing the edges of the folded note. The texture was rough, the paper worn and delicate, as if it had traveled through hands uncounted before finding its way here. Your heartbeat hummed a slow, steady rhythm, echoing faintly in the stillness. The night held its breath with you, a suspended moment pregnant with silent promise. The fire's amber glow cast long dancing shadows behind your fingers, and the warmth seeped into your bones, a fragile anchor amid the creeping cold. You unfolded the letter with careful deliberation, each crease sighing softly as the brittle fibers gave way. The ink was faded, the characters slanting elegantly across the page. The language was familiar, yet distant, a code whispered through generations, a puzzle wrapped in quiet menace. You traced the curves of each symbol, tasting the heaviness beneath their simplicity. The words hinted at a path, a crossing deeper into the wild, beyond the reach of city bells and prying eyes. A place whispered in half-forgotten stories, where shadows moved differently, and the pulse of danger beat slow but sure. Outside, the world seemed to press against your skin. The faint rustle of leaves caught your ear once more, quieter now, like the breath of something watching, waiting in patient silence. The fire flickered with a gentle hiss, its warmth tender against the chill nipping through your rags. You folded the message back slowly, every movement weighted with care. The figure beyond the trees had vanished into the dark, swallowed by the breathing forest. Yet the trace of their presence lingered, a ghost woven into the threads of night. The tension ratcheted slowly in your chest, a low coil of wary expectancy. This message was a thread pulled taut, a signal that the quiet was about to unravel. Your legs shifted under you, muscles tight beneath skin that bore the map of countless small battles forgotten by time. The earth beneath, granular, uneven, felt alive with secrets, each pebble and splinter a silent witness to your flight through shadows. You glanced once more beyond. The doorway, eyes sliding along the darkened edge of the clearing, where moonlight fought to pierce the tangled branches. A crackling whisper hummed as the fire licked hungrily at dry wood, stretching tendrils of light that barely kept the valleys of shadow at bay. The night was a cloak woven thick, folding over you, carrying whispers too soft to catch, but heavy enough to press at your skin. Somewhere far off, the bells resumed their hollow tolling, a slow and mournful pulse threading the darkness with faint echoes of civilization you longed to leave behind. You rose on unsteady legs, the cool night air closing around your shoulders like a damp shawl. The paper was folded carefully into your palm, worn edges catching the firelight in a fragile shimmer. Each breath you drew was slow and careful, a measured rhythm that matched the soft patter of distant footsteps now faded into memory. The ground beneath your toes seemed to pulse softly, the rough dirt imprinting itself on your skin, grounding you in the uneasy present. Step by step, you moved away from the fragile circle of firelight, the cold earth pressing beneath your bare soles. The straw roof overhead whispered faint scratches as the wind slipped through the gaps, carrying the scent of smoke and damp wood. Tiny splinters pressed into your skin as your hands brushed along the rough bark of a nearby tree, grounding your senses in the textures and quiet sounds that stitched the moment to reality. The dark beyond the clearing held its breath, heavy and dense like ink pooling slowly into water. Shapes shifted in the periphery, branches leaning, leaves trembling, yet no sudden movement broke the spell of waiting. Your eyes flashed slowly from shadow to shadow, catching faint glimmers of silver moonlight caught between the dense leaves, a cool wash that did little to warm the night. The silence carried a subtle warning, a song of patience and watchfulness. Your skin prickled with the scent of wet earth and wood smoke, the faintest trace of something bitter and metallic threading through the cold air. You paused beneath the crook of a gnarled branch, the rough bark biting softly into your palm. Your breath shallow as you considered the path ahead. The letter had promised a crossing, an escape routed through hidden trails where the weight of vigilance could ease. But the night pushed back against your thoughts, heavy and impenetrable. The fire's glow flickered once more, now a fading ember nestling at your feet, warm but ephemeral. You bent low to tend it, coaxing the soft pulse of life still nestled in ash and twig. The forest around you exhaled faint whispers, the rustling of leaves, a hesitant language you struggled to decipher. Somewhere beyond the darkness, a faint tapping once again threaded through the stillness, distant but unmistakable, steady and deliberate, like a slow heartbeat echoing far beneath the usual clamor of crickets and nightbirds. Your gaze lifted, searching for the source, an unspoken question suspended in the air. The shadows shifted imperceptibly, folding and unfolding like slow breaths. You felt the weight of unseen eyes, patient and unyielding. The cold seeped deeper into your bones, but the fire's memory lingered, a soft kernel of warmth amidst the pervasive chill. Ahead, A narrow path loomed, a whisper of light brushing against displaced stones and tangled roots. The faint promise of movement drew you forward, each step slow and deliberate, mindful of the fragile quiet that held the forest in its gentle grasp. The worn paper rested heavy in your hand, a silent guide in the dark unknown. And then, just as the path curved beneath a towering cedar, your foot caught on a shallow root, an unnoticed, jagged slip. The soft crack of breaking twig rolled through the silence, a sudden note that ruptured the night's fragile balance. Freezing, every fiber taut and trembling, you stared into the blackness ahead, a stillness so profound it seemed to swell with waiting. Somewhere, just beyond the edge of sight, the tapping shifted, quickening, deliberate, no longer distant, but drawing near. You stiffened as the crack of the twig echoed again, sharper this time, fracturing the thick silence like a slow, deliberate pulse. Your breath hitched, trapped in the hollow between fear and resolve. And your eyes darted through the rolling shadows beneath the towering cedar. The bark, knotted and ancient, loomed like a silent guardian, its rough surface etched deep with the whispers of seasons long past. Each leaf whispered faint secrets with the restless breeze, a quivering backdrop to the pounding rhythm of your heart. Slowly, you pressed your palms against the trembling earth, its cool grain gritty and uneven beneath your fingers, grounding you in a moment that stretched taut like a thin thread spun by unseen hands. The faint tapping persisted, now closer, dipping and rising through the hollow spaces between the trees, a slow, heavy cadence marking the approach of something unyielding. Your gaze flickered upward, catching the soft glimmer of moonlight tangled in the dense canopy, casting fractured silver across the worn path ahead. The glistening stones scattered unevenly beneath your feet felt like cold, uneven notes on a fragile melody, each step a hesitant word in a story waiting to be spoken. The ancient forest held its breath with you, a somber companion cloaked in darkness, watching your slow steps through the brittle silence. Tentatively, you moved forward, each footfall measured and cautious, pressing the fractured path like a ritual born of instinct and necessity. The ragged ends of your sleeves brushed against the creeping roots, their twisted grooves cold and unyielding as the chill deepening around you. Damp scent of earth and wet bark thickened, swirling softly with tendrils of smoke that curled lazily from distant fires, threads of warmth fighting against the night's cool insistence. You drew the worn paper from your palm once more, its delicate surface folded and creased, fragile as the secret it held. The faded ink traced strange curves and shadows, a cryptic map to a crossing whispered in half-remembered tales. Your fingers traced the edges carefully, as if the paper itself might unravel the tension woven tightly through the night. Ahead, the slow tapping shifted. Now a steady scrape against stone, deliberate and heavy. The sound held a presence, something patient, yet relentless. You froze again, breath shallow, muscles coiled like the tight strings of a bowed instrument. The cracked twig beneath your foot seemed an intrusion, a sudden sharpness in the softened shadows. A chill streaked down your spine, writhing through your breath, like smoke twisting through bare fingers. The moonlight shimmered dimmer now, veiled by drifting clouds that swallowed the forest whole, leaving the path illuminated only by scattered embers glowing faintly in your memory. The world balanced delicately between light and shadow, the edge of safety and something far darker. You bent low, your fingertips brushing a low stone that wavered beneath a tangle of moss and crumbled bark. The surface was slick, cold, inscribed faintly with grooves worn by time. A pulse hummed beneath its weight, as if the earth breathed softly beneath your touch. You lifted your gaze slowly past the stone, across the silent expanse where the figure had lingered, vanished into the folds of night. The forest whispered now more insistently, a subtle rustle, a sigh caught in the restless leaves. Your breath wove with the murmuring wind, each inhalation sharp and fragile. A thread of metal scent crept back, sharper than before, biting at the edges of your senses with a quiet insistence. You pulled your ragged cloak tighter, the coarse fabric scraping softly against your skin. Steps, tapping returned, insistent and slow, moving through the undergrowth with a steady resolve that quickened the beat deep in your chest. Your eyes scanned the shadows, searching for the shape hidden there, an echo of intent beneath the moon's ghostly eye. The quiet was a weight, as heavy as the soil pressed above forgotten graves, holding you tethered to a moment suspended between presence and absence. Your hands, calloused and steady, gathered a handful of brittle leaves, their edges curled and dry as old parchment. You let them fall slowly, watching as they twirled and settled, the soft rustling dissolving into the thickening dark. The fire's memory flickered faintly at the edge of your senses, a thin pulse of warmth against the creeping cold, a fragile sanctuary on the outskirts of shadow. You bent to the earth again, fingers trailing. Roughness kissed your skin, raw and real, a tangible thread back to the steady rhythm of survival. The muffled toll of distant bells wove low beneath the night, a slow dirge threading through the quiet, bringing with it a melancholy laced with a hint of lingering hope. Ahead, the soft curve of the path bent deeper into the darkness, disappearing beneath hanging branches heavy with damp leaves. The air here was thick, a dense cloak folded tight, holding secrets in its folds. Your steps slowed, every movement deliberate, each footfall a prayer whispered into the waiting night. Then a sound shifted, a faint, hesitant sigh, the subtle scrape of cloth brushing against bark. Your breath caught as you caught the faintest shimmer of movement, just beyond the reach of firelight. The presence drew closer, no longer veiled in shadow, but stepping slowly into your fragile circle of light. You froze, heart pulsing a slow, heavy rhythm beneath scarred ribs, every sense braced against the weight of what was coming. The night held you poised on the edge, a taut thread humming quietly between fear and fate. And as the figure's outline came fully into view, a silhouette marked by the cold gleam of steel, barely visible beneath tattered cloth, the world seemed to catch its breath with you, suspended just above the next step, waiting for the moment that would change everything. You remained frozen as the footsteps slowed, folding into the shadows that framed the edge of the clearing. The night air was thick and still, wrapped around you like a cloak woven from dust and whispers. Every heartbeat thudded slow and reverberating through your scars, a measured drum of iron resolve and wary patience. The cold pressed into your skin with the familiar grip of loneliness, yet the ember's warmth brushed your fingertips like a fragile promise. The figure lingered just beyond the patch of firelight, neither stepping forward nor retreating. The heavy scent of damp bark clung to the air, mixed with the faint metallic tang that echoed faintly in your memory. You swallowed carefully, the dryness in your throat a stubborn companion, and your eyes traced the shifting shadows that marked the forest's breath. The uneven ground beneath your knees was rough, grainy dirt interrupted by gnarled roots and brittle leaves, each a silent witness to the slow, deliberate passage of time. Your fingers brushed the worn leather pouch tied loosely to your waist, the coarse fabric grounding your scattered senses. The rustle of dry twigs at your side whispered a hesitant melody, as if the earth itself held its breath in concert with your beating heart. You bent low, letting your hands explore the rough bark of a nearby cedar, the deep crevices pressing cold and real against your skin. The memory of the letter, nestled in your palm, pressed a weight against your resolve, an unseen thread pulling you toward a path unknown. Slowly, you stood, every movement measured and breath drawn long as the shadows near the tree's base flickered like wary phantoms caught between two worlds. The faint trace of smoke wove through the night, curling in restless tendrils as if carrying a message just beyond reach. You stepped carefully onto the path that wound deeper into the darkened forest, each footfall pressing into cold earth, heavy with the scent of wet leaves and forgotten rain. The path twisted beneath hanging branches, their leaves whispering softly, a muted chorus of caution and stillness. Moonlight filtered in shards, pale and hesitant, casting a silvery wash over moss-covered stones and tangled roots. Each step was a slow negotiation with the shadows, your bare feet pressing reluctantly against the cold, unforgiving ground. The forest seemed to breathe around you, a living organism pulsing with quiet secrets and unseen eyes. A faint tapping echoed ahead, steady and inevitable, rushing the silence like a heartbeat in the dark. You paused, breath shallow, listening as the sound grew nearer, weaving a rhythm both unnerving and hypnotic. The soft crack of a twig underfoot startled your senses, sending a shiver rippling through your ribs. Your gaze shifted rapidly, catching movement. A delicate flicker of cloth, a glint of metal, barely visible beneath the muted folds of shadow. The weight of anticipation curled in your chest, a coil, tightening with every heartbeat. The air tasted cold, sharp as iron, held too long beneath your tongue. Hushed murmurs of the forest whispered past, the rustle of leaves, a trembling cadence that threaded through your thoughts like a fragile spell. Soft footsteps brushed closer, slow and deliberate, as if measured against the sighing earth beneath. You slipped forward, body low, hands steady against the rough bark guiding your path. There was a dense quiet woven through the night, thick and palpable, as if the forest itself awaited the unfolding. The glowing letter in your palm fluttered faintly, a silent talisman threaded with the promise of escape and shadowed dangers alike. Your breath melded with the chill, steady and slow, each exhale a ghost dissolving into the dense air. Ahead, the woods thickened, branches converging like bony fingers clutching at the encroaching tapping, faded momentarily, swallowed by the pressing hush. Your steps slowed, touching lightly on scattered stone and crumpled leaves. A faint glimmer caught your eye. A polished edge flashed beneath a bough, cold and unforgiving. You held still, muscles coiled, heart gnawing quietly like a silent drum. The fire's warmth faded behind you, a distant mercy swallowed by the fold of night. The path, narrow, shadowed, beckoned, winding between ancient sentinels whose bark seemed to pulse with a slow, shared breath. The air smelled of damp earth and rust, the faint copper tang lingering like an echo in your nostrils. Each sound was magnified, the soft scrape of cloth, the distant toll of bells threading through the cold, the faint shifting of unseen creatures among the underbrush. You traced the folds of your worn cloak against your skin, the fabric whispering secrets as the night pressed close. Steeling yourself, you stepped forward once more, feet moving with the deliberate grace of one walking a razor's edge. The letter's weight pressed heavier now, a quiet summons pulsing beneath your fingertips, and your eyes caught every detail of the path ahead, twisted roots sprawling like slumbering serpents, moss glinting faintly in the moonlight, and the slow dance of shadow and light at every turn. A sudden snap shattered the fragile calm. A brittle, unmistakable crack as another branch fractured quietly beneath the weight of some unseen footfall. Your breath caught, held fast between the tension and the fading rhythm of your heart. The tapping resumed, sharp, echoing closer, a steady drumbeat that thrummed beneath the skin of the world. You turned slowly, catching the faintest outline emerging from the gloom. A figure defined by the dim gleam of cold steel and worn cloth, steps measured and unhurried. The night held its breath with you, wrapped in darkness, thick enough to swallow resolve and doubt alike. And then, as your eyes adjusted to the shape bearing down the path, a slow, deliberate movement that carried the weight of consequence, you felt the first cold whisper of dawn's promise slipping silently behind the trees, brushing the edges of a night that would no longer hide its secrets. The night curled around you, a thick cloak stitched with shadows and whispers. Each breath hung heavy in the cold air, steady yet shallow, as if the darkness itself pressed against your lungs, asking for quiet. Your bare feet pressed into the soft earth, cold grit seeping between your toes, grounding you in a world alive with unseen movement. The map folded tight in your palm was an anchor in this shifting silence, a fragile promise edged with hidden meanings. You moved forward, slow and certain, trailing the narrow path between gnarled trees whose ancient limbs leaned close, their bark rough and damp beneath your fingertips. The faint scent of moss mingled with the lingering smoke that curled lazily from distant fires, a soft gray ribbon weaving through the night. Leaves trembled at the gentle touch of a breeze, rustling in a hesitant language that coaxed your senses awake. Somewhere far off, bells tolled, slow, mournful chimes that threaded the darkness with echoes of a world you dared not enter. Each footfall was a careful negotiation, pressing lightly against scattered stones and tangled roots that seemed to mirror the winding path etched onto the fragile paper. In your hand, the air was thick with the sharp scent of iron and wet earth, an undercurrent of tension that wove through your skin like a slow pulse. The path bent beneath hanging branches, steeped in darkness so deep it swallowed light whole, leaving only glimpses of silver moonbeams that shimmered faintly on slick leaves. A sudden crack shattered the brittle silence, a twig breaking beneath unseen weight. Your breath caught and held, heart fluttering like a trapped bird, wings beating slow and heavy. You froze, muscles taut beneath your rags, as your eyes searched the black folds of the forest. Shadows moved with hesitant grace, shifting just beyond your sight. A glint caught your gaze near a moss-covered stone. Cold metal, cold and unyielding, a silent herald of presence. You knelt cautiously, hands tracing the uneven ground as you steadied your breath, the rough dirt pressing cool against your palms. The faint tapping resumed, slow and rhythmic now, like a pulse echoing through the underbrush. Each sound was amplified, hoofs of silence broken into shards by the soft rustle of leaves and the faint scrape of cloth. Your fingers brushed the worn edges of your cloak, feeling the coarse fabric slip comfortingly against your skin, shielding you from the deep chill that crept beneath the night's skin. The forest seemed to hold its breath with you, trees standing like silent sentinels, whose gnarled faces were etched with timeless patience. Your gaze lifted to the thick canopy, where moonlight tangled with drifting clouds, casting fractured beams that danced on the narrow path ahead. The letter's faded lines shimmered in your hand, a secret map tracing a hidden crossing, whispered in shadows and half-forgotten tales. It pulsed with quiet urgency, pulling you deeper into the unknown. Slowly you rose, every motion deliberate and measured, your weight shifting with the soft rustle of dead leaves beneath your feet. The cold brushed against your skin, a wet cold, damp and insistent, biting at your exposed limbs, pulling you away from the fragile warmth within. Yet you held the fire's memory close, that faint, glowing ember nestled in your mind, a tender pulse of light against the encroaching dark. Ahead, the path narrowed, folding beneath heavy boughs, dripping with thick moss and tangled roots that reached out like ancient fingers. The air was thicker here, muted and dense, swallowing sound as if the forest itself desired silence. Your breath came slower, cautious, blending with the night's quiet song, the soft scrape of wind-worn leaves, the distant toll of bells marking time beyond reach. Suddenly, a subtle shift, cloth, brushing bark, a hesitant sigh blending with the rustle of branches. Your heart thrummed a slow, steady rhythm, every nerve strung tight with cautious anticipation. The presence you sensed, a figure cloaked in shadow, stepped faintly into your circle of vision, the glint of cold steel bleeding through tattered folds. The night's weight pressed in closer, thickening with unspoken threat and relentless patience. You crouched lower, body pressed lightly against the mossy bark of a sentinel tree, rough and real beneath your palms. The fire's warmth was a distant memory now, the low pulse of its glow swallowed by the endless dark. Every sense stretched taut, catching the faintest tremor, a snap of brittle wood, a whispered echo in the silence. Your bare toes curled against the cold earth, seeking the small grip of stone and root to steady your fleeting balance. The tapping stepped closer, heavy, resolute, the slow drumbeat of inevitability weaving tight around your breath. The figure advanced without haste, each step measured, unyielding, like the draw of a silent tide. The air grew thick with the copper tang of metal and earth, a scent that clung to the skin and settled deep in the bones, pulling you deeper into the forest's somber embrace. You trace the line of the worn letter once again, fading ink, whispering of secret paths and unspoken dangers. The path wound tighter now, curving beneath towering cedars whose great trunks seemed carved from shadow itself. The moon, half-veiled, cast a gauzy silver light that flickered uncertain across stones polished smooth by time. Your breath caught when a sudden glimmer fractured the gloom, a brief spark of metal caught in the slow sway of branches. The figure paused, just beyond reach, silhouette stark, against the muted murmur of ancient trees. The hollow tolling of bells echoed low through the stillness, threading the night with sorrow and waiting. And then, the slow, deliberate pull of air, a whisper of movement just beyond your sight. Something shifting in the shadows that spoke of choices yet unmade, of dangers poised and unseen. You held your breath, heart threading a quiet rhythm through the stillness, poised on the cusp where darkness might yet unfold secrets. And night waited with bated breath for the choice you were about to make. You stood motionless beneath the heavy boughs, the rough bark pressing cold and real against your palms, as your breath wove slow and shallow through the still night. The dense canopy overhead sifted the pale moonlight into fractured shards, modeling the path ahead with flickering silver and shadow. Every leaf trembled, faintly, whispering secrets you could almost hear, a subtle language of the dark forest, careful and hesitant as a held breath. The worn letter, folded deep in your hand, was weighty now, a fragile map to places whispered only in stories meant for forgotten lips. The air was thick, heavy with the lingering scent of wet earth and moss, tangled with smoke curling far away like thin fingers through the cold. You drew your ragged cloak tighter around your bare shoulders, feeling the cool fabric wrap you in a fragile cocoon. The coarse fabric, scraping gently against skin, chafed by wind and cold. The night clung to you like a damp shawl, tightening with each slow step you took along the twisting trail. The ground beneath your feet was uneven, a quilt of slick stones, tangled roots, and soft patches of fallen leaves that pressed and crunched quietly in a solemn rhythm. A distant, tolling bell hummed low through the dark, its hollow notes stretched thin and mournful across the landscape. You listened closely as the echo coughed through the thick woods, steady, patient, and endlessly fading. A soft tapping broke the fragile quiet again and again, a slow tick against stone and dirt, carved deliberately into the night's fabric. Each footfall was a soft murmur against the hush, an unseen presence marking time with long, careful strides. You crouched low beside a moss-covered stone, your fingers tracing the damp ridges, grounding you in the earthy stillness. There was no room for haste. Each motion was a meditation, deliberate as the turning of seasons. The paper's cracked folds nestled safe beneath your palm, the faded ink like whispered warnings, pressing heavy on your mind. You could almost taste the cold steel hinted at in the corners of the forest, sharp as a blade resting on your skin. As you rose, your bare toes curled into a rough dirt, the chill biting deeper with every slow breath. The path ahead narrowed between gnarled trunks, their bark knotted and cracked like ancient scars. The branches arched overhead, a dense canopy trapping darkness in its folds. The air grew heavier here, muffling sound and swallowing light, until only faint glimmers of moon shimmered on wet leaves. Your ears caught a faint shift, a breath of cloth brushing bark, the delicate sigh of movement just beyond vision. The tapping persisted, steady and unyielding, threading through the forest like a cautious heartbeat. You pressed your palm flat against the trunk of a nearby cedar, its cool sturdiness a tether to the moment, and bent your head, steadying your breath in measured rhythm. A flicker of metal caught your eye, cold and pale, almost lost in the deep greens and black shadows. The figure stepped closer, deliberate but patient, the soft scrape of boots pressing secrets into the earth. Your heart beat slow and taut, every muscle coiled like a drawn string. The air felt electric, thickening with the coppery scent of iron that wound its way beneath your skin. You slid your hand deeper into your cloak, clutching the faded letter as if it carried the pulse of the forest itself. Each footfall drummed nearer, a slow, steady rhythm that matched the measured toll of distant bells. The trees leaned closer, their whispering branches weaving a curtain of quiet anticipation. The night wrapped around you, a dense fabric of expectation and unseen eyes. Ahead, the path twisted sharply beneath ancient limbs, heavy with moss and damp leaves. You lifted your gaze slowly, tracing the outline of branches, trembling like tired hands. The fading moonlight pooled in scattered silver puddles across the earth, cool and faint, like ghosts of lost stars. A sharp scent spiraled through the air, smoke mixed with something bitter, metallic, a warning carved invisible onto your skin. The tapping faltered, then quickened, a pulse of urgency slicing the quiet. Your breath stiffened in your chest as the shadow stepped fully into the pale glow of moonlight. The figure stood still a moment longer, its silhouette outlined against the dense dark, marked by the cold gleam of worn steel peeking beneath tattered cloth. Your mind sharpened, each detail a thread you wove into careful watchfulness. The slow breathing of the forest, the crackle of dry leaves pressed beneath hidden feet, the faint pulse of heartbeat echoing like a drum beneath rib. Warm memory hovered faintly behind your closed eyes, a whisper of comfort fading into the endless dark. Then, just as your muscles tensed to dart back into shadow, an unexpected sound unfolded, a soft breath, carried on the wind like a secret offering, brushing past the edges of your mind. The figure shifted slightly, breaking the fragile stillness, revealing a single flash of worn fabric inked with faded symbols, a token folded tight against a hidden chest. The forest seemed to exhale with you, shadows twisting and bending as your heart pushed a quiet rhythm through flesh and bone. Your gaze caught a movement, a fleeting glimmer beneath a fallen branch, too deliberate to be chance, too measured for mere wind. The night waited, taut and pulsing, as if the very air had folded around this moment, pressing the pause deep into the silence. And then, as the figure raised a glinting hand just beyond reach, the earth beneath you emitted a slow, resonant thud, like the beating of a vast, unseen heart, echoing in the endless dark, reaching outward toward yours. You stepped carefully onto the winding path, the worn letter folding softly in your palm, its fragile weight a silent guide through the encroaching dark. The forest around you breathed slowly, the heavy canopy filtering the faintest moonlight that shimmered like pale ghosts on damp leaves. Each step deepened the quiet, folding the night tighter around you. Yet beneath the thick silence, a gentle rhythm pulsed, a steady heartbeat in sync with your cautious breath. The tapping sound that had haunted the shadows earlier now faded into the distance, slipping away like a receding tide. Relief intertwined with the cold that pressed into your bones. You moved forward, tracing the faint outline of ancient roots and weathered stones as they nudged your bare feet with familiar roughness. The earth was solid beneath you, a quiet reassurance after the fragile tension of the night's waiting. The path curved gently, revealing a clearing bathed in the soft, silvery light of a moon veiled by thin clouds. Here, the air felt lighter, less burdened by the pressing weight of unseen eyes. You lowered yourself to the ground by a moss-coated rock, feeling the cool, living pulse of the forest beneath your fingertips. The letter's ink blurred into the darkness, but the promise within whispered urgently, a crossing, a chance to leave behind the cage of shadows and unseen watchers. You breathed in deeply, the crisp night air filling your lungs with a mingled scent of damp earth and distant smoke. The memories of the hut, the rough straw roof, the hesitant fire, the thin thread of warmth lingered like a fading echo in your mind, grounding you in the journey that had brought you here. It was a fragile life, carved out between moments of desperate silence and the slow dance of hidden survival. But now, something new stirred, a fragile, hope. Rising on unsteady legs, you allowed your gaze to stretch beyond the clearing's edge, where shadows pooled thickly beneath towering cedars, their ancient arms tangled in whispered conversation. The path the letter had drawn was no longer just a map on fragile paper. It was a thread weaving through the dense fabric of night, pulling you forward. Light stirred faintly in the east, pets of dawn peeling back the night's layered veil. The forest exhaled, releasing a faint chorus of waking bird song, weaving fragile notes through the crisp air. Your bare feet brushed against moss and cold stones, each contact a reminder of the real world, continuing beyond the fragile cocoon of what you had endured. Far away, the tolling bells you had heard since the beginning faded into something gentler, their hollow echoes threading like soft spells of farewell across the land you barely knew. The watchers, the dangers, the invisible chains that had bound you began to dissolve into the slow rhythm of a waking day. A sudden stillness returned, not the heavy silence of fear, but a quiet peace that settled over the clearing like a balm. You folded the letter slowly, tucking it deep within your ragged cloak, a talisman of the journey past and the future beckoning. The forest, ancient and patient, seemed to lean in close, its shadow softening, its breath slowing to a comforting pulse. In this fragile moment, your body loosened, tense muscles easing as the weight of endless caution lifted like a fading storm cloud. The air no longer bit with accusation, but caressed with quiet acceptance. Your breath matched the gentle rhythm of dawn, slow and even, each exhale spreading calm through scarred flesh and weary bones. The world around you stretched and yawned, the pale light brushing soft fingers against gnarled bark and trembling leaves. You raised your eyes to the sky, now flaming softly with the first blushes of morning. The night's secrets retreated into shadow, yielding to the promise of light, imperfect, but carrying its own kind of truth. You took a final steadying breath, the chill of the earth beneath your feet grounding the passing moment. The long journey through silence, danger, and waiting had brought you here, to balance, to an uncertain but gentle peace. There were no triumphant fanfares or dramatic revelations, just the quiet completion of a story carried on whispered footsteps and cautious hope. The fragile warmth of the fire once kindled behind you flickered in memory, a soft ember nestled in the chamber of your heart. As the sun began to climb, splashing gold across the landscape, the shadows folded back into the trees, and the world exhaled with you. The weight you carried eased, replaced by a steady calm that settled deep and enduring. In that moment, beneath the awakening sky, and among the ancient trees that had watched over you, the darkness finally lifted enough to let a breath of peace unfold. The next steps, a slow dance forward beyond fear, beckoned gently. And as your bare feet pressed into the soft earth one last time before rising into the new day, you carried with you the quiet promise of rest, renewal, and the soft, unbreakable thread of survival. The world waited patiently, vast and indifferent, yet somehow still welcoming. Above, the sky opened fully to light, casting gold and rose across the fading mist. The forest hummed softly, a lullaby for the end of one night and the beginning of another. And so you walked onward, not as a shadow slipping furtively in the dark, but as a soul touched by the first pale glow of dawn, stepping into the tender embrace of a day where nothing was certain, yet everything was possible. The night had folded away. Peace, delicate and fleeting, had settled, and in that peace, your story found its quiet closing breath.